Frank, 5 minutes, is that your understanding?
Yes.
Cool, okay, thank you. We're in your hands.
Okay, I've been retired as an economist for about 6 or 7 years, but I still have a few clients, and one of them is Environment Canterbury. And last year I undertook quite a comprehensive review of their funding and rating policies and methods. So I'm quite familiar with rates and the Local Government Act requirements. What concerns me is your very low level of Uniform Annual General Charge, or UAGC. This is about $118 for every property. Now, the annual plan states that the purpose of the UAGC is to recognise the cost associated with each property that is uniformly consumed by the inhabitants of Christchurch. In fact, it does no such thing. The annual plan states that the UAGC is based on calculations, but is not based on the calculations of the costs of any activity, but is based on what is assessed as being reasonable. Now, this puts the cart before the horse. The LGA requires councils to first identify the beneficiaries of any expenditure, amongst a whole lot of other matters, and only then to assess, and if necessary, modify that outcome of this allocation of cost. Now, my submission is that you should do what the LGA requires you to do. You should identify suitable candidates for UAGC funding, and I've submitted the 3 programs of work that I think should be UAGC funded, and the details and the benefits that I've set out in my submission. And such a UAGC would be about $350. It's still only about 6% of rates revenue, and this is well below the 30% that the government prescribes as the sort of maximum that would be reasonable for you to levy. I know some councils actually set the UAGC as being 30% of rates revenue. And generally, the Christchurch UAGC is quite low relative to other councils around the country. Now, the second issue is the inconsistent application of fixed charges for the council services for households. Now, there's a compulsory fixed charge for waste management, and this is in the areas where wheelie bins are collected. And in my opinion, this is a good use of the fixed targeted rate. However, the same logic is not applied to water supply or for sewage collection, but it should be. Ask yourselves, what has the capital value of a property got to do with how much water is used or how much liquid waste is produced? And is it fair that the burden of paying for these services is not shared equally by serviced households? And I think the way that the rates are structured means that rates are becoming an intolerable burden on people who happen to live in the more expensive areas. And by way of illustration, and I said in my submission I pay about $1,000, but in fact I pay $600 a year each year for the last 3 years for water supply and sewage collection services that we haven't even used because my house was uninhabited. It was uninhabitable because of the earthquakes. The new annual plan will increase this to $700 a year, and when we rebuild, we'll be paying about $1,400 a year, but at least we'll be using the services then. Now I worked out my expenditure on various goods and services for the last year to March 2014. Now, we don't own any rentals that would inflate the cost, but even so, local authority rates were still our biggest expense item at about $6,200. They would have been $7,200 if the main dwelling had been habitable. And when I rebuild, because I'm going to spend the insurance money, I'd expect to have to pay $10,000 a year in local authority rates. And by way of comparison, my vehicle costs were about $5,500, insurance was about $3,000, my groceries were about $5,400, medical, optical and dentistry cost me about $4,700, power was $2,500, phone and internet was $1,200, we donated $2,800 to charity. I haven't calculated or included travel, recreational, entertainment expenses or probably the biggest cost actually is central government taxation, but we won't get into that. So I think just the way you structured your rates is going to make it quite intolerable for a lot of people, particularly with the way rates are increasing with infrastructure costs. You're going to have to pay the burden of interest charges on infrastructure borrowing.
Thanks for your submission. I just wondered though, if you're really advocating that the uniform annual general charge be increased?
Yes, I am.
Yes. So what I was going to ask you really then is, in terms of, for example, you said it'd be intolerable for people to pay. What would probably happen too though is if everybody paid a higher annual general charge, people on lowest incomes or lowest value properties in effect would be paying more. So in terms, if it was intolerable for people to pay, how would you suggest that they would pay?
Well, it is very low at the moment. The government set a limit of 30%, and you're well below that. So obviously I can afford to pay the 10 grand or whatever I'll be paying in rates, but I just point out there's a big cost, and I know a lot of elderly people who don't want to move out of their homes, and the valuations have gone up, and they're the ones that are going to be subsidising everyone else, particularly through the fixed charges, as well as the uniform annual general charge.